what the CEO of that SEAL team said. We all have more to give. That inspires me. So what I wanted to do after all these years, I'm going to go back and teach a little Constitution. In 2013, my goal for my entire life had been to take my kids back to the sesquicentennial of the Battle of Gettysburg. Okay? Because as running Pickett's charge as a kid, I can't tell you how many times, and back in the day where you could take a pick and shovel out on the battlefield, you get killed for doing that now. But when you could do those things, we did those when I was a kid. And I wanted to share that with my family. So in 2013, I had the chance to take my whole family back to visit the Gettysburg because I wanted to show them. But I took them on what I called the tour of sacrifice. Okay? So we flew into Richmond, and this is the whole goal of the trip. There's some simple truths that we all talk about, but none of us really take the time to hone down and simplify the other side of complexity. If we can simplify our message to those who want to hear us, they will get it better. Correct? And it's difficult to do sometimes to simplify the complex because we talk about these things of, I'm an American and, you know, let's go. What does that mean? What does being an American mean? And I want to talk about what does freedom mean. So I wanted to take my kids back to teach them, in their dad's view, what being an American is. And as far as I'm concerned, do I care what anybody else thinks when I'm talking to my own kids? Not at all. So we flew into Richmond. We went to the Battle of the Crater in Petersburg. We went to the Richmond battlefields. We went down to Jamestown. We went down to Virginia Beach, and I toured with them the SEAL base, introduced them to my buddies. Went to Cape Henry for the point of first landing. Went to Yorktown. Drove back up the peninsula, headed north. Now this was in more than a day. We took a week. Went up to Fort McHenry. Then we went to Philadelphia State House. We went to Valley Forge. We went up to New York City. There was even some battles there, not well known, and you'd never know today. And then we headed back down to Gettysburg. And at each point of the stop, I told my kids, and I asked them, let's take Valley Forge for example. Okay, children, what were the people thinking here? What was their definition of being an American? Were they more concerned about the following? Their safety, security, comfort, convenience, and lifestyle. Let me explain very briefly each one. Safety. Am I going to catch a bullet right now? Right now. Am I maybe going to die right now of hypothermia or illness? Safety. Security, long-term security. Planning for the future. Making sure you got all the hay in the barn. Safety, security. Think about Valley Forge. Comfort. Were they more concerned about their comfort? Convenience. They weren't home helping out the wives and the children, were they? And lifestyle. Or were they more concerned about freedom and the opportunities that freedom would give? Because those are the two bullseye. You cannot have opportunity and do our best without freedom. That's a natural law. You can't have it. And the sacrifices it would take to maintain that. Think about Jamestown. Think about the pilgrims coming over. Were they more concerned about their safety, security, comfort, convenience, and lifestyle? Or freedom, the sacrifices it took to maintain it, and the opportunities it would give them? So my definition to my children is, what it means to be an American is just that. And it's a very quick litmus test that you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, what do I hold more dear? What do I hold more dear? Now, when those Minutemen were getting kicked out of their doors at Lexington and Concord by their wives, were they thinking about, hey, do I have guarantees here? I'm going to get a pension? Do I have guarantees I'm going to be safe? Were they thinking that? Heck no. Where have we gone as a country? You know, whatever side, and this I use it as an example, not to stir the pot, But whatever side you come down on the Bundy Ranch issue, are you kidding me? You are willing to kill somebody because you're being ordered to do so over this? The great hero would have said, what do you value more? Your pension? Your safety, security, comfort, convenience, or lifestyle, or what? What a hero that would have been to have somebody from the BLM SWAT team just say, you know what, guys? This is wrong. It's not worth it. Would he have been a national hero to the freedom lovers? I think he would have been. Okay, let's talk about the definition of freedom, because we all say we want freedom. We love freedom. It's like I love clean air. Okay, now this is my own definition. It may not equate exactly with yours, but I've spent years trying to simplify the complex. And my own definition of freedom is this. Freedom exists when government acts within the legitimate powers delegated to it by its citizens. Now let's go back and review that very quickly. Freedom exists when a government acts within the legitimate powers delegated to it by its citizens. Okay, think about that. Shane asks a very good question of, do you think the government should have to follow its own rules or follow the rules? Yes, they should. I put legitimate powers in there because many governments, because of a democratic sway, which our founders wanted to keep us away from, tend to operate under illegitimate powers delegated to it. And illegitimate to me means anything delegated to the federal government that a person or group of people do not have the natural right authority to delegate. Everybody get that? So that is an illegitimate power delegated. Okay? So I'm going to tell a couple more stories. We're going to run, any questions as we're moving along here? Okay. So just pop them up when you do. So when I was 17 years old in Mr. Dugan's government class in 1985, when Ronald Reagan was president, I was reading the 17th Federalist paper. Okay? Now I was reading seriously at this time. So I'm reading the 17th Federalist, and basically I'll give you a synopsis of what it meant to me. This is Alexander Hamilton basically saying this. Look, you anti-federalists, you're crazy if you think this government's going to get it run away. Even the most ardent tyrant is going to be satiated with the power to collect taxes, declare war, appoint ambassadors, coin money. You get where I'm going? Now, I'm not saying that's verbatim, but this is what it means to me. And if you go back and read this, you'll see where I was in there. They're never going to want to get involved in our menial domestic institutions, such as agriculture, education, land use. This was 30 years ago, people. I was 17 years old. Ronald Reagan was president, and I saw it then. Is that crazy? I wasn't a political science major. It did. But I'm just telling you the writing was, we were drifting in the wrong direction at the time even. Now, Reagan did make some inroads. I love Reagan, and I want to tell some things about him. But the point is, he wasn't to blame for that, right? And I'm not blaming Reagan. But the point is, did we have federal overreach even then? Okay, we had federal overreach. So at that time, I looked for different ways. What did the founders want us to do to remedy the problem if we got in this state? Now, anybody who doesn't think that we are in a state that the founders did not intend, please read Federalist 43, 44, and 45. That's all you got to do. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I came out so vehemently against Judge Roberts' decision in the Obamacare ruling is based on Federalist 41, which is Madison describing, in part, the welfare clause. Basically saying to the anti-federalists, look, you don't have to worry about that because the taxing power is only limited to those things that Congress can actually do. And the general welfare clause only applies to the general welfare of the powers that are delegated to Congress. Okay? So those who argue that the taxing power was supposed to be unlimited, at least Madison and the other Federalists were arguing to the anti-federalists what? It might be unlimited as long as they're using it for those powers we've delegated them, but over that it's not. Okay? Okay. So I look for different ways of what did the founders want us to do in order to get back our republic if we went out of whack. There's a lot of other ways. Jefferson wrote the Kentucky Resolutions. It's very beautiful. Just read the first couple paragraphs. Madison wrote the Virginia Resolutions, right? Very beautiful. A lot of explanation on when interposition or nullification would work, when it wouldn't be appropriate. There's a lot of other ways to do it. But one of the main ways, and this is in Federalist 43 and number 85, that the Federalists want us to handle things is through Article 5 of the Constitution. And I wanted to explain this a little bit because Hamilton ends the argument in the last Federalist, in number 85, basically saying, look, if you anti-Federalists, even if you're right, we've given you Article 5 of the Constitution that in the end shows that the states are sovereign, that the states have retained sovereignty over everything that they have not delegated out, unless they're too afraid to act, of course. And part of the reason I told some of these stories, okay, is this. We're Americans. There's a big, and look, a lot of times I will not get invited, and I spent most of the time on the SEALs and this kind of thing. But a lot of times I won't get invited to talk about Article 5 because it's too divisive. And there are strong passions on both sides. I have found in most groups that those on the conservative side that want Article 5 are about 80 to 90% or more. And there is a vocal minority that really believes strongly. And I do not question their sincerity. But my point in asking a lot of these questions, when the SEALs went out on 9/11, when they went out at Lexington and Concord, when I just gave the definition of what it is to be an American, what do we put our priorities on? Are we afraid? And is that what the backbone of being an American is? You know, Thomas Paine wrote, I love Thomas Paine. He's one of the best writers ever. He said this. He said, look, guys, is an island always going to govern a continent? So this is Thomas Paine calling people out. Is an island always going to govern a continent? It's not going to happen. At some point, we're going to break free. It's going to happen. So are we going to leave it to our children to do our work? Is that the kind of men and women we are? He was specifically calling the men out. Is that the kind of men and women we want to look in the mirror? Oh, they'll take care of it later. When it really becomes an emergency and they're really stepping on our rights, then we'll get it. No, Thomas Paine said, be a man, be a woman, stand up, and let's do it right now. And if catastrophe falls, let it happen on my stand. Let it happen in my day so I can thwart whatever storm is coming from my children. My point is, in either way that you stand, bring it on now. This is what Americans are about. We do not shirk from a fight because we are uncertain of the consequences of a constitutional convention, the original one, or doing these other things. So, very briefly, so I'm into teaching. I love to teach American history, Civil War, Founders era, pre-Founders era, colonial periods, any of that stuff, and I love to do it. But I love to teach what we can do today specifically. Very quick story. when I was a kid, my dad got me a riding lawnmower to mow our 5 acres of grass out in the front yard. Okay? And I'd have been so used to pushing that lawnmower as a 10-year-old, 5 acres of grass. You know how long it takes to mow 5 acres of grass with a push lawnmower? By the time you can't do it in a day. I couldn't. It would take me days. But I'd get it done over time, and by the time you finish, guess where you're starting over? So my dad got me this big riding lawnmower and my brother, and he said, look, guys, I've given you the tools now, okay? But if you break it, what's happening to you? I'm breaking you. Guess who kept pushing the riding lawnmower? I mean the push mower. That's right, me, okay? I kept pushing the push mower because I was too scared to use the tool because I was afraid of the consequences. Do you guys get this? I came in and complained to him one day, Dad, this is terrible. This is like child slavery, all right? This is not fair. What do you think he said to me? You're an idiot, son, okay? I bought you the lawnmower. You're not using it. What did I say to him? I know, Dad, but you said you're going to beat me with your belt. And in those days, they weren't kidding, okay? So he said, look, come on out. I'll familiarize you with it a little bit more and ride it. Just be careful. So I did it, and I went out there, and the rest of my teenage years were much happier for it. Okay? The point of this is we need to use the tools we're given. I believe if the founders came down, they'd be going over the checklist. Have you tried this? Okay. Have you done this one? And then the main one, look, Madison said, look, the Constitution was a lifeless parchment until breath was breathed into it during the ratification debates. I love to study the ratification debates because we see the meaning of what it was supposed to be. Virginia ratification debate I like the most because there's the most notes on that. In effect, anti-federalists, and let me tell you guys, I love the anti-federalists because they had some real strong concerns. Do I throw out what Patrick Henry says? Nope. Richard Henry Lee? Nope. William Grayson? Nope. George Mason? Nope. I'm listening to these guys. They said too much power in the federal government. George Nicholas gets up, the best debater on the Federalist side at the Virginia ratification debates. No, there's not. There's not too much power. But even if there is, we've given you Article 5. Patrick Henry gets up and says, but Article 5's a ruse and you know it. It's going to be too complex to use and the states will never do it. George Nicholas gets back up with Tench Cox and Madison and says, no, it's not. Don't you have any faith in the next generation they can figure it out? Do we have to give them all the whole directions? They don't. What they said was each state can decide ahead of time what they want to do and agree ahead of time to the amendment or amendments that they want to propose. And they basically went over what I'm proposing today, which is a compact, which Shane said, part of the groups that I'm proposing, that a compact is just an agreement amongst sovereigns, a state, that they agree ahead of time on what a convention would be about. These are held up in the Supreme Court. Each state in the country is a party to at least 20 compacts. State legislators are familiar with what they do. But instead of resolving concerns of those fearful of a runaway convention, they're just kind of plugging in their ears. But these are things that can help answer the questions of what's it going to be about, who the delegates are, how long will it last, and on and on. And these compacts are enforceable. There's always risk, though, isn't there? That's what being an American is about, standing up for freedom in spite of the risk. So a couple last comments here. I have two pieces of evidence from the founding Thomas Jefferson in 1798, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have time to get over here. If I could pass one more amendment to the Constitution, it would be this, and I would rely upon this alone to safeguard our liberties for now and forever, and that is an amendment which prohibits the federal government from borrowing. Thomas Jefferson, 1798. Ronald Reagan, 1994. Okay, so I'm giving you the bookends here. So Jefferson understood finance, and he understood the power of finance. okay? Reagan in 1994, I met Lou Euler at the Freedom Fest last July. Sat right next to him. Lou Euler worked for Ronald Reagan in the 80s and 90s. He had a letter from Ronald Reagan. I've got it in my little pack over here if anybody wants to see it. It basically says, Lou, you're right. Congress will never pass a balanced budget amendment on its own. It's a good thing the founders gave us a way that the states can make this happen. And he goes on to endorse the state process of making this happen. Those are two pretty good guys to have endorsements from, are they not? Now, I am not saying that a compact and a balanced budget amendment is the only thing we need. But if we can get, as Scalia said and Warren Burger, and whose letters are misused all the time, as Scalia said in 1979, if just once the states can come together and figure out a way to provide a template to pass even one amendment to the Constitution, it would change everything. Because the balance of power would start to shift back to where? We have to use all the tools the founders have given us, our fins, our wetsuits, our caps, our hoodies, everything. And there's no reason not to and cry foul and that we don't have this. So a couple quick other things. The way we're going to win this debate is the moral argument. Before I went to Gettysburg, I read every single thing Lincoln ever wrote. I took a year and a half to do it, or spoke about. Now, the way he won the debates and what he did, because he got back into politics because of the Dred Scott decision. And he said, look, we are one Supreme Court decision away from becoming all slave. Because if you can take a slave in a slave state and go 3 years in a free state and come back and he's still slave, then you could protect any property from any slave owner into any free state, right? So what he did is he took it from being a political issue to a moral issue, that these are people. This is what we think these are people. This is a moral, not political issue. We can win the fight of spending our children's money the following way, because Lincoln defined slavery as the following. And he did this over time. He didn't say this in one concept. He said this: when one man consistently eats the bread of another man's labor without his consent, that is slavery. Okay, let's rewind. What are we doing to the next generation? He won the moral debate. This is not a political issue. This is a moral issue. So I'm taking from a bunch of different quotes. This is not something he said all at once, but out of all my readings, this is what he meant to say. When one man consistently eats the bread of another man's labor without his consent. What are we doing to our children? We are enslaving them. In effect, partial slavery, right? What if it's when one man eats 40% of the bread of another man's labor without his consent? What are we doing? It's also taxation without representation. And so those of us who look down our noses at the Southern slaveholder with disdain and despite, what are we doing to our own children? Ignorance is bliss, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. So are we willing to give up our safety, security, comfort, convenience, and lifestyle in order to preserve freedom and opportunity for our children and ourselves? Because it could be painful. And are we willing to do that? Are we willing to be SEAL citizens, to take the risk, to get out there and maybe get injured? And what I mean by that is maybe we fail, maybe we don't, but we've got to try. Lincoln said, I wish I could get him more to his speeches, but even if he was the only man standing on a principle and knew he would fail, what's he going to do? He's going to get up and do it. So what I've got tonight, I've got some handouts that after everything you can come up and pick up that talks about the balanced budget amendment, how it would work. We've had limited funding, but we've already passed this compact in 4 states. We have not in Arizona yet. You know, I think the world of Andy Biggs, but he's wrong on this one, and he's not learning. And the problem is he has got so much power there that many others kind of follow along that way. But this is something that I've committed to preach to the grassroots It's something I know a lot about, I've studied about. Article 5 from A to Z, I do a whole discussion on that. We didn't get in there tonight, touched on it a little bit. But I do have, if anybody wants to even donate a little bit.